Hello everyone. Let us see today Government of India Act 1919. It is also popularly called Montague-Chelmsford Reform or Montford Reforms, where we will see that whether the suggestions sought by the British government from the Indian National Congress and Muslim League, which they ultimately came with a final agreement in the Lucknow Pact and made consensus that these are our suggestions and submitted memorandum to the Viceroy of India, and ultimately which was incorporated into the Government of India Act 1919. Whether it was incorporated fully or not, that we are going to see in this section. We are in the MOOCs YM course on nationalism and constitutional growth in India, 1858-1920. This is Parvez Alam from the Department of Political Science, Aligarh Muslim University. What was the background of the Government of India Act 1919? In 1918, Edwin Montague, the Secretary of State, and Lord Chelmsford, the Viceroy, produced their scheme of constitutional reforms known as Montague-Chelmsford or Montford reforms, which led to the enactment of the Government of India Act of 1919. Montague-Chelmsford reforms, which came into force in 1921, the sole purpose of this act was to ensure Indians of their representation in the government. The act introduced reforms at the central as well as provincial levels of government. If we can see, further, that what were the main features of the Montague-Chelmsford reform 1919? It was the reform also in terms of the provincial government and as well as the central government, right? So we are going to see that what were the reforms in terms of executive reforms and what were the reforms in terms of legislature reforms. We are going to see all the reforms and what were the kind of criticism or drawbacks of these reforms. If we see in the reforms in the provincial government, there was the idea of diarchy or introduction of diarchy, which means the rule of two. So executive councillors and popular ministers, as well as the governor, who will be kind of having a executive head in the province. So in that sense, executive councils and popular ministers, they form the two, and then that will be a kind of diarchy principle. What were the subject division? They were reserved subjects, which will be administered by the governor through the executive council. Law and order, finance, land revenue, etc., would fall into the category of reserved subjects. Transferred subjects, again, it will be governed by the popular ministers, so administered by ministers from elected members of the legislative council. So education, health, local government, etc., would be into the hands of the transferred subject, or in the hands of the ministers. So, at the provincial level government subjects, it included the matters which were related to a specific province, such as public health, local self-government, education, general administration, medical facilities, land revenue, water supply, famine, relief, law and order, agriculture, etc. Also, the act which introduced rule of two individuals parties for the executive at the level of the provincial governments. The diarchy was implemented in 8 provinces: Assam, Bengal, Bihar, and Odisha, central provinces, United Provinces, Bombay, Madras, and Punjab. The provincial government were given more powers under the system of diarchy. The governor was to be the executive head in the province. Now, in terms of division of subjects, as I said and reiterate, that it was two categories called reserved and transferred. As I said, that reserved list belongs to the governor's administration, and the transferred actually belongs to the administration by ministers nominated from among the elected members of the legislative councils. Uh, in fact, it included education, health, local government, industry, agriculture, excise, etc. In case of failure of constitutional machinery, the provision came with the idea that in the province, the governor could take over the administration of transferred subjects also, if there will be any kind of paralysis of the constitutional machinery. Restrictions and interference. The Secretary of State for India and the Governor General could interfere in respect of reserved subjects, while in respect of the transferred subjects, the scope for their interference was restricted. So, in a way, it in a way talks about the interference by Secretary of State or Governor General in the domain of the governor, but in the governance by the ministers who are kind of elected by the members of the Legislative Council, they will not have any kind of interference. Moving ahead, if we see more features of the Montague Chelmsford reform in terms of executive, there was responsibility to the ministers, who were kind of responsible to the legislature. Now, a resignation will be on a no confidence motion. Executive councillors, on the other hand, were not responsible to the legislature. As I said, that governor could take over the administration of transferred subjects in case of failure, and the Secretary of State and Governor General could interfere only in the reserved subjects, which is, by the way, administered by the governor in the provincial executive. So, moving ahead, if you see legislatures, again there were reforms in terms of legislature. If we talk about provincial legislative councils were further expanded, and 70% of the members were to be elected. The system of communal and class electorates was further consolidated. Women were also given the right to vote. The legislative councils could reject the budget, but the governor could restore it if necessary. The legislators enjoyed freedom of speech, powers of the governor. If we talk about, the governor could overrule the ministers on any grounds that he considered was special. Also, he retained complete control over the finances. The legislative councils could initiate legislation, but the governor's assent was required. The governor could veto bills and issue ordinances. So, in that sense, the governor was in fact more empowered than even the elected body, and ultimately these anomalies were removed in the Constitution of India, where India became independent, and that did not require any kind of authoritarian tendency by any of the unelected executive. In terms of central government, if we talk about, it was still without a responsible government. If we talk about executive, the chief executive authority was Governor General. The lists of administration, if we talk about, they were central and provincial lists introduced. If we evaluate our Indian Constitution parallel with the 1919 Montfort reforms, what we in fact see that the very list of the union and the state in fact was introduced in 1919, which is called central and provincial list, and also Governor General's control over reserved subjects and provinces, what we call it the union, will have a residuary power in terms of that what we call it concurrent list where union may prevail over the states. Now, in terms of Indian representation, if we see the three Indians in the Viceroy's Executive Council of eight were in fact introduced. Governor General's powers again was highlighted, where control over reserve subjects will be, of course, the Governor General's prerogative. The Governor General's power will be the authority to restore cuts in grants, certify bills, summon, prorogue, dissolve chambers, and issue ordinances. Because these terms are already in application, these terms are already in a way in practice in the British form of government, parliamentary form of government, where there's summoning, proroguing, and dissolving of the House of Commons and House of Lords, which are in a way, now by 1916 and 1919, going to be almost 200-300 years of the parliamentary form of government. In a way, these terms and these concepts and these practices are going to be part and parcel of the Indian parliamentary form of democracy, where the very beginning or very initiative started from 1919 Montague Chelmsford reform. Now, in terms of legislature, if we see the introduction of bicameral legislature, the central legislative assembly at the union level or at the central government level, there will be central legislative assembly, which we call it lower house, which will have a more members. In terms of council of state, that what we call it upper house, which will have a lesser number. So in the Central Legislative Assembly, the 144 members out of that 103 are going to be elected by the people themselves, and 41 are going to be nominated. And also, in terms of Council of State, 60 members, 34 are going to be elected and 26 nominated. As it was demanded in the Lucknow Pact, the final agreement agreed by both of the parties, International Congress and All India Muslim League, that the tenure of the assemblies must be for 5 years. And in fact, the very provision of the Montague Chelmsford reform incorporated and acknowledged that fact. So, the tenure will be of Council of State will be 5 years, where only male members will be there, and in the Central Legislative Assembly, the tenure will be of 3 years. The legislative powers, if we talk about, the legislature will have a kind of power of having a budget where legislators could vote a part. 75% of the budget was not votable, and that was a big kind of move by British government, that not allowing the Indians to kind of have a say on the finance part, and that's what the motive or the mission of the British government was, to have a monopoly over the finance and the budget. Also, questioning, supplementary questions, adjournment motions were allowed. Secretary of State controlled affairs related to the Government of India. So there was urban and rural governance, which was in a way, when Montague Chelmsford reform started functioning, or it came into force in 1921. The elected local council in rural areas were introduced, and democratic and Indianized urban municipal corporations also in a way started functioning during the 1920s. Now, let us see that what were the drawback of Montague Chelmsford reforms. 1919. If we can in fact see, some of the things related to the budget, for an example, where legislators could vote apart, but 75% means legislators, could vote only 25% of the budget and not the whole part of the budget. So that's kind of one drawback, one criticism. And similarly, the governor's power ultimately was also one of the dissatisfaction by the leaders of the movement. So as it was a limited franchising was very limited, restricting the participation of a large section of the population. There's a lack of control over governor general. So central legislatures had no control over the governor general and his executive council. Unsatisfactory division of subjects. The division of subjects at the center was not satisfactory, leading to governance challenges. And also in terms of seat allocation, which was based on importance, so allocation of seats for the central legislatures to province was based on the perceived importance, leading to disparities. Also, the very system of diarchy at the provincial level was undesirable. It was irrational. Division of subjects and parallel administration at the provincial level was irrational and unworkable. Ministerial lack of control. Provincial ministers had no control over finances and bureaucrats, causing constant friction in the governance, and governors could overrule ministers on important matters. And it was a financial burden shift, because the change in the payment of the Secretary of State from Indian funds to the British Exchequer, as it was demanded that the salary of the Secretary of State should not be from the Indian funds, rather it should go from the coffers of the British finances. But that was not agreed in the Montague Chelmsford reform. So, that was another, financial burden shift, in terms of, that Secretary of State was going to be paid by the British, Exchequer. But through the repression, Rowlett Act and repression mechanisms were introduced, in 1919 itself, where government was granted powers to imprison individuals without trial, and that indeed is one of the act which can be dubbed as a draconian, because individuals were imprisoned without even prior notice, and then also because there was no recourse to any civil liberties, where this right of habeas corpus was in fact suspended. Congress opposed it. It found it disappointing and unsatisfactory. When Rowlett Act was introduced, it's a mass resignation, which happened in the Legislative Council, and also leaders resigned, including Jinnah, and then they resigned in protest. Jallianwala Bagh massacre happened, where in Amritsar people gathered to protest against the Rowlett Act and also Montague Chelmsford reform, and this galvanized leaders like Nehru and Gandhi, leading to nationwide protests. Hunter inquiry, got constituted, and General Dyer, who was responsible for Amritsar's, Jallianwala Bagh, episode, got dismissed. He was sacked, and the mixed British public support for Dyer, in fact, considering him unfairly treated. That in fact was also one of the reception. So, in conclusion, one can say that Montagu Chelmsford reform became a basis for future legislation. In fact, it was in fact incorporated into the Government of India Act 1935, also the Constitution of India of 1949-50, and then as I said previous slides, that is all these concepts were already in practice in British form of government, like responsible government, self governance, federal structure principles. All these things emerged from these reforms, and also it became a constitutional milestone, or rather Magna Carta of modern India, because it's going to shape the constitutional history of India by giving various kind of basis for inclusion of many of the principles within the fold of the Constitution of India. I'll stop here. Thank you so much. In the next segments, we'll be trying to look into some of the important events like Rowlatt Act, also arrival of Gandhi, and Jallianwala Bagh, massacre, and of course, Khilafat and non-cooperation movement, and many more things which so get tuned with this course called Nationalism and Constitutional Growth in India, 1858-1920. This is Parvez Alam from the Department of Political Science, Aligarh Muslim University. Thank you. Thank you so much.